I had just leaned over the small birthday cake when my daughter Susan looked across the restaurant table and said, "Are we really going to pretend this is normal?" The candle flame trembled in front of me. Carol was sitting beside me in her blue sweater, her hand close to mine, and I felt her pull it back before anyone else noticed. Paul set down his fork. "Susan." "No," Susan said. Not loud, but sharp enough that the family in the next booth went quiet. "Mom built this family for 48 years, and Carol gets to sit here like she earned it?" I felt the room shrink around me. It was my 74th birthday, in the same local restaurant where Margaret and I had taken the kids after Little League games and school concerts. And now every memory in that place felt like it was being used against Carol. Carol kept her eyes on the table. She did not argue, did not reach for me, did not reach for me. She just sat there with a kind of stillness that made me ashamed I had let things get this far. I said, "That's enough." Paul gave me a look that was more tired than cruel. "Dad, you keep saying that, but it's never enough. You married her, moved her into Mom's kitchen, and now we're supposed to smile while she spends what Mom left behind?" Carol's face tightened, but she stayed quiet. "She has never asked me for a thing," I said. Susan wiped under one eye, and somehow that made her voice harder. "That's what they do. They don't ask. They wait until a lonely man hands it over." The words sat on the table like spilled grease. My granddaughter Nora stared down at her napkin. She looked sick, like she wanted someone older to stop it and had just realized the older people were the problem. Carol whispered, "Henry, please don't." But I heard what was breaking in her voice. Not anger, not guilt. Just the sound of a woman who had been careful for too long. Paul leaned forward. "We're not trying to hurt you, Dad. We're trying to protect you." "From my wife?" I asked. "From being used," he said. A waitress named Becky Harris slowed near our booth with a coffee pot in her hand, saw Carol's face, and kept walking. Then Susan looked at Carol and said the sentence that emptied every breath from me. "Mom would be ashamed." Carol stood. No chair scrape, no scene. She folded her napkin once, placed it beside the untouched cake, and said, "Happy birthday, Henry." Then she walked out. The little bell over the door rang once behind her. A moment later, Becky Harris stepped back toward our booth, looked under Carol's empty chair, and frowned at the purse still sitting there. Becky Harris stood at the edge of our booth with the coffee pot still in her hand, staring under Carol's empty chair like she had found something she wished she hadn't. Paul was the first to look down. "Is that hers?" I already knew it was. Carol's brown leather purse sat half hidden against the wall, the strap twisted under one leg of the chair. Susan wiped her eyes and looked toward the front windows, where Carol had disappeared into the parking lot. She probably didn't get far. Nobody moved. That was the part that shamed me. My wife had walked out of my birthday dinner, and for one long second, every person at that table acted like the purse was easier to deal with than what had just been said. I reached for it. "I'll take it." Becky leaned down before I could stand. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson. I didn't want anyone stepping on it." She handed it to me with both hands, careful, like it was something fragile. The purse was heavier than I expected, warm from being beside Carol's chair. As I took it, the clasp caught against the edge of the table. A thin white slip slid halfway out of the side pocket and fluttered onto my lap. I froze. Not because it was a receipt. Carol kept receipts for everything. Groceries, gas, church-bake sale supplies, even birthday candles she bought and forgot to use. I froze because of the name printed across the top. Margaret Lawson. For a second, I thought my eyes had made it up. The restaurant lights were dim, and my hands were not as steady as they used to be, but the letters stayed there. Margaret Lawson. My late wife's name on a pharmacy receipt that had just slipped from Carol's purse. Paul noticed my face. "Dad?" I folded my fingers over the paper without crumpling it. "It's nothing." Susan's gaze dropped to my hand. "What is it? I said it's nothing." The lie came out too fast, and Nora heard it. She looked from me to the purse, then toward the door where Carol had gone. Becky shifted beside the table. "Do you want me to see if she's outside?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to run after Carol, hand her the purse, and pretend I had not seen Margaret's name where it made no sense. Instead, I sat there with the receipt hidden under my palm while my birthday candle burned down into the frosting. And all I could think was one question. Why did Carol have a pharmacy receipt with Margaret's name on it? I did not open Carol's purse. That sounds like a small thing, but sitting there with Margaret's name burning through that thin white paper, it felt like the only decent choice I had left. Paul kept watching my hand. "Dad, what did you see?" "Nothing that belongs to you," I said. Susan's face tightened, but for once she did not answer. Nora looked relieved, though she still kept glancing at the receipt like it had made the whole table dangerous. I slid the receipt into my shirt pocket because it had already fallen out in front of me. Then I closed the side pocket of Carol's purse without looking inside and stood up. Becky Harris stepped back. "Do you want me to bring the cake box?" "No," I said, softer than I meant to. "Thank you, Becky." Outside, the parking lot lights made every car look empty. Carol was not by the entrance. She was not near my truck. For one cold second, I thought she had walked home alone, and the shame of that hit harder than anything Paul had said. Then I saw her under the awning near the closed flower shop next door, arms folded against the wind, looking out at Main Street like she was trying to decide whether she still belonged in our life. I walked over and held out her purse. "You left this," I said. Carol took it carefully. "Thank you. Neither of us moved." Behind the restaurant windows, I could see Paul and Susan still at the table, their shapes bent toward each other. Nora was standing now, like she wanted to come outside, but did not know whose side would make the least damage. I touched my shirt pocket. "Carol, when Becky handed me your purse, a receipt slipped out." Her eyes lifted to mine. "I didn't look through anything," I said quickly. "I swear to you, I didn't. But I saw the name on it." Carol's hand tightened around the purse strap. "Margaret's name," I said. The street noise seemed to fall away. A pickup rolled past. Somewhere down the block, a door shut, and Carol flinched like it had happened inside her chest. She looked older in that moment, not weak, just tired from carrying something I had never asked about. "Henry," she said, "I can explain some of it." "Some of it?" Her mouth trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "I should have told you before now." I waited. Carol looked back toward the restaurant, then down at the purse in her hands. "Margaret asked me not to make it a family story." I slept in the recliner that night because I did not know how to climb into bed beside Carol with that receipt between us. She did not ask for it back. She did not defend herself any further. She only said, "If you need to ask Mr. Briggs, ask him," and then she went upstairs with her purse held against her chest. The next morning, I drove to Briggs Family Pharmacy before the lunch crowd could fill the aisles. It was the same place Margaret had used for years, tucked between the post office and a hardware store, with a little bell over the door and a rack of greeting cards nobody ever seemed to buy. Alan Briggs looked up from behind the counter. "Henry Lawson, haven't seen you in a while." "I need to ask you something," I said. His smile faded when he saw my face. "All right." I took the receipt from my shirt pocket and laid it flat on the counter. I had smoothed it out twice before leaving the house, but the crease through Margaret's name still showed. Alan looked at it, then looked at me. "Is it real?" I asked. He did not answer right away. He adjusted his glasses and read the top line, the date, the store number, the little codes printed near the bottom. "Yes," he said finally. "That came from here." My hand tightened on the edge of the counter. "It has Margaret's name on it. I see that." And Carol's initials. Alan's eyes moved once toward the aisle behind me, like he wished this conversation had walls around it. Then he lowered his voice. "Henry, I can't discuss private medical information." "I'm not asking what the medicine was," I said. "I'm asking why my wife had this." Alan rested both hands on the counter. Carol Lawson was listed as an authorized pickup person on Margaret's account. The words did not land all at once. Authorized by who? I asked. Alan held my eyes. By Margaret. I looked down at the receipt again, but it had become a different piece of paper. Not proof of something ugly. Not exactly proof of something good, either. Just a door I had not known existed. When? I asked. Alan's jaw moved as if he was choosing every word. Before you and Carol were married, my throat went dry. He added, that's all I can say without Carol present or giving permission. I shouldn't have said even that much, except the authorization itself explains why her name could appear there. I folded the receipt carefully and put it back in my pocket. Outside, the post office flag snapped in the wind, and I stood on the sidewalk with one question heavier than all the others. Why had Margaret trusted Carol before I ever called Carol my wife? I drove home with the receipt in my pocket and Alan Briggs's words following me into the driveway. Carol's car was gone. For a moment, I was grateful, then ashamed that I was grateful, because it meant I could look for answers without looking into her eyes. The house was quiet in that late morning way, all refrigerator hum and ticking clock. Margaret's old kitchen still held pieces of her, even after all the years Carol had carefully refused to move too much. I stood by the junk drawer for a full minute before I opened it. Inside were rubber bands, takeout menus, a flashlight with weak batteries, and the little floral calendar Margaret used during her last year. I had not touched it since I put it there after the funeral. The cover showed a red barn in snow. Margaret had circled the month in blue pen, like she always did when she was trying to stay ahead of something difficult. I opened it to the date printed on the pharmacy receipt. At first, I saw what I expected. Doctor appointment at 10, my mail route written in the corner, a reminder to call Susan about Nora's birthday. Then I saw one small line in Margaret's handwriting, Carol, Briggs, 2:30. I sat down hard at the kitchen table. Not because Carol's name was there, because it was written in Margaret's hand, calm and ordinary, as if Carol's help had been part of the day and not a secret big enough to split my family open. I turned back 1 week. There it was again, Carol. Meals. 2 days later, Carol. Pharmacy. A week after that, C. Dropping soup. Don't fuss. I almost smiled at that last part, because it sounded exactly like Margaret. Then the smile disappeared, because I realized she had written it for herself, not for me. I heard Carol's voice from the night before. Margaret asked me not to make it a family story. I laid the pharmacy receipt beside the calendar. Same month, same pharmacy. Same careful handwriting, circling around a truth I had somehow missed while living inside the same house. On the counter near the phone, I found an old mail route schedule folded under a stack of appliance manuals. My name was written across the top in Margaret's block letters. I matched the receipt date to the route sheet. That afternoon, I had been covering the long rural loop out past Miller Road. I remembered coming home late, exhausted, finding Margaret asleep in her chair with a blanket over her knees. I had thought she had made it through that day alone, but the calendar said Carol had been there. I spread Margaret's calendar and my old mail route schedule across the kitchen table like they were maps to a place I should have known by heart. At first, I only checked the one date from the receipt. Then I turned another page, and another, because Carol's name kept showing up in Margaret's careful blue handwriting. Carol, soup. Carol, Briggs, C, coming after lunch. Small notes. Ordinary notes. The kind Margaret used to leave for dentist appointments, oil changes, and birthdays. Except these were written during the hardest months of her life, and somehow I had never seen them. I pulled the route schedule closer and ran my finger down the dates. On 3 of the days Carol's name appeared, I had been working the long side of town, the route with the steep porches and the dogs that chased the mail truck. On another, I had taken Margaret to a morning appointment and then fallen asleep in the recliner for 4 hours, still wearing my shoes. I remembered waking up to the smell of chicken broth. Margaret had said, "Missers, Turner dropped it off. But there was no Mrs. Turner on the calendar that day. There was only Carol. I sat back and let that small lie settle over me. Margaret had protected somebody with it. Maybe me, maybe Carol, maybe herself. The phone rang once, and I nearly jumped out of the chair. It was Paul's name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad," he said, too stiff to sound casual, "Susan's upset about last night." I looked at the calendar. Carol was upset too. He went quiet. Then he said, "We shouldn't have said it that way. But you still believe it." "I believe you're vulnerable," Paul said. "I believe she knows that." The old Henry would have softened his voice and tried to make peace. The old Henry would have said, "Let's not fight," and given everyone a way to avoid the truth. Instead, I looked at Margaret's handwriting and said, "You don't know as much as you think you do." Paul exhaled sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm trying to understand something." "About Carol?" "About your mother," I said. That stopped him. After I hung up, I went back through the calendar one more time. Carol's name appeared too many times to be an accident, too steadily to be charity, too quietly to be something she had wanted credit for. By the end of the month, one question had changed into another. Had Carol simply helped Margaret once, or had Margaret chosen her? The church office smelled the same as it always had: old hymnals, lemon polish, and coffee that had been sitting too long. I stood outside the half-open door with Margaret's calendar folded in my coat pocket, wondering how many times I had walked past this room during her illness without knowing part of my life was filed in a cabinet inside it. Mrs. Ellis was not there anymore. The new office volunteer was younger than Margaret would have expected, with silver glasses and a phone headset around her neck. "I'm Henry Lawson," I said. "My wife Margaret used to be on the meal list here, years ago." Her expression softened. "I remember the name from the old binders. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said. "I need to see if there are any records from that time. Meal deliveries, rides, pharmacy errands, maybe." She hesitated, but not unkindly. "That's pretty old. I know." She studied me for a moment, then went to the tall metal cabinet behind the copier. "We keep more than we probably should." The binder she brought out was green, with a torn label that read Care Team. Spring. My fingers felt clumsy turning the pages. There were names I remembered. Women from church. A retired teacher. A man who drove people to appointments when their families were working. Then I saw Carol. Not once. Again and again, Carol. Chicken soup, no onions. Carol. Ride offered, declined. Carol. Briggs, pick up if needed. I read the lines twice, trying to turn them into something smaller than they were. The volunteer leaned over the desk. "Was she family?" I almost said no. Then I stopped. "She is now," I said. The words landed strangely, like they had been waiting for me to mean them. I kept turning pages until a folded yellow note slipped loose from behind one of the meal sheets. The volunteer reached for it, but I was closer. It was not a letter, just a square of office paper with Margaret's name at the top and a few notes written beside delivery preferences. "No tuna casserole. Henry pretends to like it." I laughed once before I could stop myself, and it hurt. Below that was another line. "If Carol is available, send Carol. She doesn't make a fuss." The room went quiet around me. That was Margaret's handwriting. Not church shorthand. Not someone else's guess. Margaret had asked for Carol by name. I folded the note carefully and pressed it flat beneath my palm. And for the first time since the birthday dinner, the question was no longer whether Carol had been around Margaret. The question was why Margaret had wanted her there. Carol was at the kitchen sink when I came home, washing the same clean coffee cup like her hands needed something to do. I put Margaret's calendar, the church note, and the pharmacy receipt on the table, not stacked like evidence against her. Spread out where she could see each piece before I said a word. Carol turned off the water. "You went to the church." "I did." She dried her hands slowly on a dish towel, but she did not look angry. If anything, she looked like someone hearing footsteps outside a room she had kept locked for years. "I'm not here to accuse you," I said. Her eyes moved to the yellow church note. She read Margaret's lines silently, and her mouth tightened when she got to, "She doesn't make a fuss." "That sounds like her," Carol said. "It does." For a moment, neither of us moved. The house felt too quiet, like even the refrigerator knew to hold its breath. I touched the pharmacy receipt with one finger. "Alan told me only what he could." "Margaret authorized you." Carol nodded once. "And the calendar says you were there. The church records say you were there. But I don't understand why I didn't know." Carol sat down across from me, but she kept her back straight. Quiet, not weak. Hurt, not cornered. "Because Margaret didn't want everyone talking about her like she was a project," she said. The answer was simple enough to believe and painful enough to stop me. I slid the receipt closer to her. "Are there more?" Carol looked toward the hallway, toward the stairs, toward anywhere but my face. Then she stood. When she came back, she carried a flat cookie tin with faded poinsettias on the lid. I remembered it from Christmases long gone, full of ribbon candy Margaret used to pretend she bought for the children. Carol set it on the table and placed both hands on top. "I kept them because I didn't know what else to do with them," she said, "and because throwing them away felt wrong." "May I see?" She closed her eyes for a second, then pushed the tin toward me. Inside were pharmacy receipts, folded in pairs, held with paper clips and rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. I did not grab them. I waited until Carol took the first stack out herself. The dates were not random. They clustered around the weeks I remembered as the worst ones. The weeks when Margaret stopped pretending she was just tired, when pill bottles lined the counter, when the house smelled like broth, soap, and worry. One receipt had a small printed line near the bottom, "Hospice-related pickup." I looked up at Carol. She did not explain. And that made the next question worse. How many of Margaret's hardest days had Carol carried while I never even saw her? I looked at the receipt until the words blurred. Hospice-related pickup. Carol sat across from me with the cookie tin between us, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She was waiting for me to accuse her of something, and the shame of that nearly broke me. "Carol," I said, "I need the truth in order." She nodded. "Not because I think you did wrong," I added, "because my children already made up a story, and I don't want to build another one just because I'm hurt." Carol took a long breath. "I met Margaret through the church office. That's all it was at first." She touched the yellow note with Margaret's handwriting, just the corner of it, like it still belonged to another woman. "I helped with meal schedules," she said, "then rides. Then pharmacy errands when she was too tired or too proud to ask one of you to leave work again." I swallowed hard. "She didn't want people hovering," Carol said. "She hated pity more than pain." That was Margaret. No argument in me could stand against that. Carol slid one receipt toward me. This one was the first balance I paid. She was embarrassed. Said Henry was already doing enough. She said Paul had his own bills and Susan had Nora and work, and she didn't want every prescription turning into a family meeting. I looked down at the date. I remembered that week. I remembered telling Margaret I could handle everything, and I remembered believing it because she smiled and let me. Carol's voice stayed steady, but her eyes shone. There was no secret romance. Henry. No overlap. No betrayal. I was a church volunteer helping a sick woman who became my friend. The words should have been unnecessary. But after what Paul and Susan had said, after what the receipt looked like in my hand, I needed to hear them plain. "After Margaret died," Carol said, "I stayed away from this house for months." "You sent a card," I said quietly. "I sent 3. You answered the 3rd. I remembered that too. A sympathy card with a plain white envelope. No perfume, no flowery message. Just, 'I hope you ate something today.'" Carol looked at me then. "We became friends because you were grieving and I understood part of what she had carried. We married later because loneliness turned into something gentle, not because I was waiting. That was the micro-truth I had needed without knowing it. Carol had not stepped into Margaret's place. She had stood near the edges of Margaret's pain and stayed there quietly. I pressed my palm over the receipts. "Then why didn't you ever defend yourself?" Carol looked toward the window, where dusk had started turning the glass dark. "Because Margaret didn't want her children feeling guilty," she said, "and she didn't want them embarrassed by what they couldn't do." Carol's words stayed in the kitchen after she stopped speaking. Margaret didn't want her children feeling guilty. I looked at the receipts, the brittle rubber bands, the dates lined up like a quiet confession nobody had asked for. Did Margaret ever leave anything in writing? Carol's eyes moved to the cookie tin. "For me?" she asked. "For anyone." She pressed her lips together, then looked away. "Alan mentioned something once." I sat straighter. "Alan Briggs? It was after the funeral," she said. "Maybe 3 weeks later. I went in to pick up my own refill, and he said Margaret had left an envelope at the pharmacy. He said it had my name on it." "You never picked it up?" Carol shook her head. "Paul was outside that day." I waited. "He saw me coming out of Briggs," she said. He didn't say much, just looked at the prescription bag in my hand and asked if I was already helping myself to the family accounts. The shame in her voice was quiet, but it had weight. "I went home," she said. "I told myself if Margaret wanted me to have something, maybe it was kinder to leave it alone." I stood before I knew I was going to. "Get your coat." Carol looked up. "Henry." "No," I said, softer. "Not to make a scene, not to prove anything to anybody, but if Margaret left something for you, then it belongs to you." We drove to Briggs' family pharmacy in near silence. Carol held the cookie tin on her lap like it might fall apart if she loosened her grip. At a red light, I reached over and covered her hand, not to ask for forgiveness, just to remind her she was not walking back into that place alone. Alan Briggs saw us come in together and understood more than I wanted him to. Carol spoke first. "Master Briggs, years ago you said Margaret left an envelope for me." Alan's face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. "I wondered if you'd ever come for it," he said. He did not ask why. He did not look at me for permission. He turned, unlocked a small drawer beneath the counter, and pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed in clear plastic. The front had Carol's name written in Margaret's handwriting. Alan handed it directly to Carol. "This is yours." Carol's hands trembled when she opened it. I did not reach for the note. I did not ask to read over her shoulder. Carol read the first line, and her breath caught hard enough that I reached for her elbow. Then she turned the paper toward me. Margaret had written only a few lines, but they were enough to make the pharmacy aisle disappear. She thanked Carol for helping without making her feel small, for picking things up quietly, for being kind to me when the house got too quiet. Carol covered her mouth with the back of her hand. I looked at Margaret's handwriting, then at the woman standing beside me, and I understood what I had to do next. Not to punish my children. To stop letting Margaret's name be used to hurt the woman she had trusted. I did not call Paul and Susan to explain. I called to invite them to Sunday lunch, and when Susan asked if Carol would be there, I said, "She lives here." That was the first boundary, though none of us named it yet. Carol stood beside me in the kitchen while I set the table. She watched me place Margaret's framed photo near the center, not at the head, not pushed aside, just where the morning light could touch it. Then I laid down the pharmacy receipt. Beside it went Margaret's kitchen calendar, open to the month where Carol's name appeared in Margaret's handwriting. Last came the note from the pharmacy, still folded along the creases Margaret had made years ago. Carol touched my sleeve. "Henry, you don't have to do this." "Yes," I said. "I do." Paul arrived first, stiff-shouldered, carrying nothing. Susan came in behind him with Nora, and the three of them stopped when they saw the table. Susan's eyes went straight to Margaret's picture. "What is this?" "The answer to what you said at my birthday dinner," I said. Paul looked at the receipt, then at Carol. Dad, don't turn this into some kind of. I'm not turning it into anything, I said. Your mother already wrote it down. That quieted him. Nora stepped closer, careful as if the table might break. She read the receipt first, then the calendar, and her face changed when she saw Carol's name written again and again beside Margaret's appointments. Susan reached for the calendar, but I put my hand lightly over the page. Not to stop her from seeing it, to stop her from grabbing it like evidence in a fight. Look, I said. Don't tear through it. Her cheeks reddened. Carol had not sat down. She stood near the counter with both hands folded, giving them every chance to look at the proof without looking at her. That was when I picked up Margaret's note. I did not read it aloud like a performance. I walked to Carol, placed it in her hands, and said, "She wanted you to have this before I even knew it existed." Carol's lips pressed together, but she did not cry. Nora whispered, "Grandma wrote that?" I nodded. For Carol. Susan's mouth opened, then closed. Paul looked down at the receipt again, and for the first time since Margaret died, I saw something other than suspicion on his face. I pulled out the chair beside mine and held it for Carol. She looked at me, then at Margaret's photo, and sat down. I took her hand where everyone could see it. "You can love your mother for the rest of your lives," I said. "But you will not use her name to hurt my wife." No one spoke. I looked at Paul, then Susan. "You may come back to this house when you can honor both women, not one by hurting the other." Susan stared at Margaret's handwriting on the table, and for once, she had no quick answer. Susan did not come back the next day. Neither did Paul. For almost 2 weeks, the house stayed quiet, and I let it stay that way because silence was better than another apology made too quickly. Carol still sat beside me at breakfast. She still folded the dish towel over the oven handle the way she liked it, and she still paused when the phone rang, as if part of her expected the old hurt to start again. Then one Sunday afternoon, Susan stood on the porch with Margaret's old recipe box in her hands. She did not try to hug Carol. She did not come in crying. She just held out the box and said, "I found this in my pantry." Carol looked at me first. I nodded once. Susan stepped inside and set the box on the kitchen table. "Mom's Sunday chicken recipe is in here," she said. "I never could make it right." Carol stayed still. Susan swallowed. "Would you help me try?" It was not enough to fix everything. But it was the first thing Susan had done that did not ask Carol to disappear. Carol opened the recipe box carefully, touching the worn cards like they belonged to Margaret, because they did. She used more pepper than she wrote down, Carol said. Susan let out a small breath that almost became a laugh. "That sounds like Mom." A few days later, Paul called me from the parking lot of Briggs Family Pharmacy. "I put money into their hardship fund," he said, his voice rough. "Under Mom's name and Carol's." I looked across the room at Carol, who was reading by the window. "That was a decent thing," I said. "I don't expect that to make us even." "It doesn't." "I know," Paul said. That answer mattered more than any apology he could have forced himself to give. Nora came by the following Friday with a notebook she claimed was for a college project, though she never opened it. She sat at the counter with Carol and asked, "What was Grandma like on those pharmacy days?" Carol looked startled at first. Then she smiled gently. "She liked to pretend she wasn't tired," Carol said, "and she hated tuna casserole." Nora laughed, then wiped her eye before either of us could mention it. I did not declare the family healed. I did not unlock every door at once. Paul and Susan were welcome when respect came with them, and not before. That evening, Carol and I made Margaret's Sunday chicken together. Before putting the recipe box away, I folded the original pharmacy receipt and tucked it behind Margaret's stained recipe card. Carol saw me do it and reached for my hand. The box closed softly on the counter, holding Margaret's handwriting, Carol's sacrifice, and the first quiet proof that our family had finally made room for both.